Welcome to another episode of Le Quand, des experts, and we are very pleased today to have Maria Allerton back for another episode. So Maria is a clinical nutritionist based in Sydney, Australia. She works with clients from all over the world, and Maria has been in clinical practices since 2013 and specializes in Gilbert syndrome, digestive health, detoxification, mental health, and the gut-brain immune interface. Maria offers online trainings for hair tissue, mineral analysis, and Gilbert syndrome. In this interview, we'll talk about what hair tissue mineral analysis is, when was it developed, how to carry out the test, how does it compare to blood and urine-led tests, main uses and clinical cases, how to learn more about HTMA, and Maria's final thoughts to conclude. As a reminder, everything that is discussed in this interview does not intend to diagnose or treat a medical condition, so please ask your healthcare practitioner before implementing any new treatment. Good morning, good evening, welcome again. I'm so happy to have you back, Maria. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So today we are going to talk about something which is pretty very interesting and not that well known, at least not this side of the world, not in France, I think. Which is hair tissue mineral analysis, right? Short for HTMA. And you're a pretty good expert, Maria, so that's why you're here today to let us know more about this type of test. So can you let us know what it is, just to start with?
Sure. So hair tissue mineral analysis is a test, obviously, that we do on hair, on clean, uncolored hair samples, and there's a few labs that run the tests. So there's two big labs in the US, Trace Elements and ARL, and they were originally established by the founders of hair analysis. So I think they're the most reliable, dominant labs. There's another one called Doctors Data that run the test, and then there's a whole bunch of other independent labs that seem to have popped up recently. So it's hair that's tested for mineral and heavy metal content. And it's not, we're not just looking at what's high and what's low, which mineral's high, which heavy metal. It's a lot more holistic and all-encompassing. And we're actually looking at the function of our endocrine system. So we're looking at the thyroid and the adrenals and blood sugar regulation. So it's a really great test to look at the systems, not just what's happening, with your zinc, or something, but what's happening with the person's stress response, what's happening with their endocrine organs.
Wow, that's amazing. And when was it developed? Is it like a test that had existed for a long time, or?
Yeah, I believe I just printed off a history slide from my online course on hair analysis, and I believe it was in the 70s. It was Dr. Watson, PhD, and Dr. Watts, PhD. There was another doctor involved called Dr. Melvin Page, and they were like the original doctors who founded the labs and started using it with thousands and thousands of people, and in the US. And a lot of the publications that were done in the area were written by these original doctors.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's quite a long time already. So how does it compare to other types of tests, like, urine or blood tests?
Yeah, so that's a really common thing that, clients and practitioners ask. So it's the short answer is it doesn't. So it's looking at something totally different. So I think, the most common tests that people are used to doing are blood tests, right? So they'll go and do their iron blood test or, vitamin D. And some things are really important to measure on blood, like those particular two, iron studies and vitamin D. But when it comes to minerals and vitamins, it's actually, and particularly, minerals, it's actually really not possible for us to measure what's in blood accurately because the minerals live in the tissues and intracellularly. So they don't really live in the blood. Right. They're transported by blood, but they don't live there. So, a really simple example is magnesium. So, for example, you've got a magnesium blood test and it comes back normal. It's in range. So people assume
very commonly, right? Very commonly.
Yeah, but they're having all these symptoms. They're having leg cramps and can't sleep properly and, tension in their muscles and joints. And they're having all the symptoms, but their blood test comes back fine. So that's because we can get mineral depletion at the tissue level before it becomes a problem in the blood. So the body is really, really excellent at keeping our blood nutrients as stable as possible because blood is very important, right?
Yeah.
So they do that at the expense of the tissues. So the body will keep the magnesium as good as it can at the expense of taking it out from bone, for example.
Okay.
So someone might do a blood test and it looks okay, and it's because it's being drawn out of the tissue to try and support the blood.
So it would be the same for zinc, copper as well?
It would be the same for all minerals. Yeah, because that's just not where they live. They don't hang out in the blood. Iron is the only one that really hangs out in the blood. They are much more in tissue storage. So, when you're looking at hair, you're looking at the analogy I use is like blood is your highway. So that's cars are moving back and forward all the time. And hair is like your car park, and if you've got a really empty car park, you're not going to have, the resources to deal with everything. So we're looking at storage, storage and detox for heavy metals.
Okay. Wow. That's very, very, very important. So it's is it something that you run in on almost all of your patients?
Yeah, pretty much 90% of patients will get a hair analysis as a starting point. So I really like using it as a starting point, together with bloods. Like it's just it's a cost-effective test. It's easy to do. It's non-invasive, so it's great for children or people who don't like needles. So it's a good screening test to be able to tell, okay, what's happening here? What's happening with person's stress levels, their electrolytes, their copper and zinc, so their immune system, do they have issues detoxifying? So it just gives you a really broad range of information that you can't really get from many other tests, or you can get bits and pieces from much more expensive tests, like salivary adrenal panels and much more in-depth tests that may need.
Yeah, you can do.
Yeah, like they're things that you might need to order later. But yeah, hair is just a really good quick screen. And I find that clients really like it. Patients like it because it gives them data. So it gives them data to look at what's happening right now. And then you put them on a course of treatment, to correct whatever's imbalanced. And then you do a repeat test, and then they can see. It's like a report card. Everyone likes a report card.
I know. And how often do you do the repeat test? So 6 months? What is it?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. Yeah. So children, for example, I'll do much more frequently. So children maybe every 2 or 3 months because they react to things quite quickly and things can change quite quickly. With adults, it depends on the health condition. So if they're going through something very acute, and something that, we've been treating extensively, they might need a sooner retest, like again, 3 or 4 months. Usually for standard is like every 6 months or at least, once a year for people just ongoing. So I have a lot of clients who just they're in good health, but, they just want to make sure that they're in really good health. So they just do one once a year and, adjust their diet, lifestyle supplements based on that.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Thank you for sharing this with us. So, would you like to share maybe an example of maybe one of your case studies or something that really?
Yeah. Well, look, there's so many, but I think a good one is probably, I'll use children as an example because they're really straightforward, easy to understand tests. So, for example, if you have a child presenting with behavioral issues, aggression, they might be having ADHD type symptoms. So, they're not focused, they're having trouble learning, things like that. So what usually might come up on a hair analysis and that I see really, really commonly is excessive copper. So they might have copper toxicity. They might be really deficient in magnesium and zinc, which are the calming, nervous system regulating nutrients. And they might be very toxic from heavy metals. So, they might have mercury, cadmium, aluminium all stacked up on their hair analysis. When you look at children's hair analyses, it's usually very, very straightforward what needs to be done. And, these kids end up on medications and all sorts of, inappropriate therapies because the root cause has never been identified. And, usually the root cause is really easy to address. So once you rebalance all their minerals and support the detoxification pathways, they bounce back really, really quickly.
Wow, that's so good. And do you see a lot of many children in your clinic?
I did used to. Yeah, I did used to see a lot of kids. Now I only see sort of the really complex cases. So like autistic spectrum disorders or, severe sort of cases. And I have another practitioner in the clinic who does what we call simpler ones, which is, basically all the things that kids experience these days: behavioral issues, emotional dysregulation, malabsorption, all those sort of things. So you can easily see them on hair mineral analysis.
And do you see also, of course, adults, like grown-up people with the similar symptoms? Not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, so hair, it can be used for anyone. A really common pattern on hair in women is adrenal depletion. So, you'll see this really low sodium, potassium on hair and really high calcium and magnesium. And that's basically because someone's been burnt out and they've burned through all their electrolytes. They're really depleted. So they've got that hypothalamic pituitary, HPA axis dysfunction, aka adrenal fatigue. And essentially it's, they're depleted of electrolytes. And as soon as you give them a little bit of that or a lot of that, their energy comes back and they're able to digest their food better and their sleep is better. So we just have, the 4 big minerals that run the body: calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, are really important. And if we don't have them in the right amounts, there's going to be pretty obvious health consequences. And they're just things that we don't think about.
Of course, yeah. That's. It sounds basic. It sounds very simple, right? But sometimes it can be, the approach can be different and can be longer maybe and harder to look after someone. And you mentioned thyroid dysfunction as well?
Yes. Yeah, so thyroid, so that's where it's quite different with bloods, when you see thyroid dysfunction on hair, it's not necessarily you will see thyroid bloods that are off, right, or out of range, because hair is much better at picking up subclinical thyroid issues. So you'll see it as an early dysfunction. So the thyroid ratio on hair is calcium to potassium, for example. And, that's, again, that adrenally depleted woman will have high calcium, low potassium, and that's going to make her tired and constipated and dry skin and hair falling out and with all the thyroid symptoms, right? But, they will go and do their bloods and their bloods will be totally normal. And their doctor is like, well, there's nothing wrong with your thyroid.
But they're suffering already. They have all the symptoms. Yeah.
And the patient is like, well, then why am I having all these symptoms? So it's picking up early dysfunction, and it's telling us that there's a problem. There's a problem with retaining potassium and sodium, which are the electrolytes.
Wow, that's really amazing. So it's a really good weapon to use, right?
Yeah.
And can you tell us more about your course? Because I know you have a great course about hair tissue mineral analysis.
Yeah. So this course has been out for a couple of years and is a big culmination of lots and lots of case studies and doing research into various approaches on, what works for hair analysis and what works for treatment. So it's a combination of hair analysis theory, explanations on, how to properly understand hair analysis. So that's another area, where some people really struggle and they misinterpret the results quite often. So it's about interpreting it correctly, and then lots of case studies in different areas. So mental health, gut health, thyroid and adrenals, blood sugar dysregulation, kids' behavioral issues, and autistic spectrum. So I cover lots and lots of areas that most practitioners will see in clinic, and lots of case studies, and then lots of protocols. And none of the protocols are branded, so they're just ingredient-based protocols. So practitioners from any country can use them.
Yeah.
And I've had lots of practitioners, from the UK and the US and Ireland and France, actually, in fact, as well, do the course and then apply it to the products that they have access to.
Wow.
So it's very, very comprehensive.
Yes, yeah, highly recommend. I'm one of your your practitioner students. Yeah, and I love your course. And
Great.
would you have any other tips or any other things you'd like to share with us today about this type of test, and why we should encourage people to to do this test and to use this test?
Yeah, I think when we consider like how we work as practitioners, we do our intake of the patient, and we have our intake forms, and we look at all their symptoms, and a lot of the time we can make some pretty decent assumptions about what's going on, and we have these theories about what's going on. But what I find is that actually doing a test like hair mineral analysis enables you to, first of all, be really sure about what you're recommending and what, whether it's the right approach for that person at that time. And secondly, it also just enables you to see everything, not just a couple of things that you're focusing on based on your intake, but it actually enables you, the whole picture. And, even just based on symptoms, you would never know if someone is, toxic with mercury or aluminium, or, there's things that we just can't really guess or estimate without actually doing a test. And also, we can't even tell if someone is stressed or how they're stressed, or, what stage of adrenal activation they're in, because the symptoms might be all over the place. So, yeah, I kind of have, my clinical approach generally is test, don't guess. So I like doing that. Yeah, and I think it just gives you confidence, as a practitioner, like you're recommending something based on solid results.
Absolutely, rather than guessing and trying things. And there's something that I just wanted to ask you as well about, you mentioned heavy metals, of course. You really see a nice reduction in heavy metals after, I guess, a few months or maybe a year or years of treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, usually within a few months. And again, it depends on the person, right? So with children, you see it very, very quickly if you implement, a good treatment plan based on the results. Adults take a bit longer, and it depends again on the stage of adrenal dysregulation. So if someone's very adrenally fatigued, detox is not the body's top priority, right? So they're going to struggle a bit more. But yeah, look, it's identifying that that's an issue. And then you can also make recommendations for someone to buy a water filter, stop breathing in the fumes when they drive past a factory.
A moving country.
Yeah, or moving house. Exactly. Yeah, so there's so many things that you can recommend for people to reduce their toxic load based on the test results.
And is heavy metal a big issue for most of your customers, most of your clients? Do you see this big issue?
Yeah, look, heavy metals are an issue for every human on Earth today. And in fact, when the hair analysis comes back and it doesn't show heavy metals, it doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that they're currently not being detoxified. So, yeah, that's when I'm most suspicious, is when the metals are not showing up on the hair analysis. Yeah. And then I'll usually do things to stimulate some detox.
They come up later, right?
Yeah. And they come up later all the time. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Well, I hope that more and more practitioners, especially from here, from France and Europe, will get and do your course. It's really fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria, for being with us today, once again. And we may see you again, maybe another time for.
Sounds good. Sounds great. I love it.
Thanks, Maria. I'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Bye.